All right, I think it's just about time we got started. Good morning, everyone. My name's Camille. Just a brief intro. I've been the resident beekeeper here at Chenard's for the last couple of years. Usually I work with European honeybees, but I also raise blue orchard mason bees, and hopefully I can share some insights into October harvest and winter care with you today. So briefly, let's just go over a recap of the year, things that should have happened in early spring, beginning in mid-February through April 1st when you release your mason bees. The most important thing this time of year is to keep an eye on weather conditions. You want a good stretch, probably about 3 days long, in order to release your mason bees, get them feeding. You should have flowers blooming within 100 feet of the area, give them plenty of food. Spring care is pretty straightforward. So you need to ensure that the bees have everything they need. They should have plenty of nectar and pollen resources nearby within about that 100-foot radius. You should have lots of water, some good clay mud for them. If you have good clay mud, like we have most of the area here in Oregon, just keep that nice and moist. You don't want it too wet, but you don't want it to dry out either. You want something that's going to be nice and supple and easy for the mason bees to mold into their nesting material. Wind protection is definitely a must. High winds going past your nesting block is going to make it more difficult for your mason bees to get to and from home, especially with nesting materials in tow. Pest protection, also something important. Make sure your nesting area is away from pests like birds, ants, skunks. It should be about head height. If you've got an ant problem, you can put your mason bee house on a post. You can use some Vaseline or something kind of slickery so that they can't reach that mason bee block. June 1st through late September, your mason bees are basically done. They've laid their eggs. They're now larvae and they need to develop. So you can protect your mason bee block from pests by putting it in a warm, dry area to develop. Put the entire block or your tubes in a paper bag or a fine mesh bag. And you can store that somewhere where it's nice and warm. So if you have an uninsulated garage, that's great. If you put it in your house, just make sure it's not too cool. The mason bees do need the warm summer temperatures in order to develop. So into October cocoon harvest, by now your bees are fully developed. They're in what's called the imago stage. If they were to hatch right now, they could fly off, but they know that winter is coming and they're going into a winter dormancy until it's safe to come out and there's plenty of food around again. So the actual harvest involves you physically removing the cocoons from your wood tubes or from your wood blocks. You discard any unsuccessful cocoons. They aren't all going to make it, even in a perfect scenario. You'll be cleaning your cocoons with a sanitary solution. This is ridding the cocoons of diseases, parasites, larval droppings, things like that. You'd be rinsing and drying the cocoons. You don't want to leave a solution of bleach on there. You want to make sure that they're nice and clean and ready to go into the refrigerator for winter. So why do we harvest? Mason bees in nature have done just fine on their own, but we, by domesticating mason bees, are putting them into conditions where they're pretty cramped. They're very close to each other, whereas in nature they'd be kind of scattered. They'd find reeds here or there, but they wouldn't be in such large clusters. So mason bee blocks make it a lot easier for predators and diseases to attack them. Harvesting allows us to clean your mason bee habitat for next year. This is going to increase the habitability of your bee habitat. So clean houses will harbor fewer pests. More mason bees will survive in the living conditions. You'll have less pollen mites, less mono wasps, less spiders to contend with. That's never fun, having a bunch of spiders in your bee blocks. Harvesting also raises survival rates of this year's cocoon batch. When you clean your cocoons, you're getting rid of fungal and bacterial diseases like chalk brood that could wind up infecting the entire nest. If you have chalk brood in the very front tube, you've got tubes in the back that are unaffected. When those hatch, the mason bees are going to all have to go through that infected cocoon with chalk brood, and it's going to wind up spreading and making a big mess. Another really important reason why we harvest is to control the hatching times in spring, especially for those of you interested in the pollination power of these little bees. You can release them right as soon as your fruit starts to pop flowers and get optimal pollination in. Another reason why it's nice to control your hatching times is the weather doesn't always cooperate, like we saw this spring particularly. If you have a short warm spell, mason bees may hatch out, and if there's not food around, more freezes arrive, that's going to wipe out that batch. So save some mason bees and release them in multiple batches in spring. Supplies for harvesting are pretty variable, as long as you have something to clean the cocoons with, a water source to rinse the cocoons with, something to collect and organize your cocoons, like a sheet pan here. You'll need a colander for rinsing, some paper towels for patting dry, a storage container for overwintering. A humidity works great. You can use any kind of plastic container as long as it has ventilation. Of course, you'll need your mason bee block or your mason bee tubes. As you can see here, I've opted for the mason bee block, which I can use every year and just clean it. You'll need an instrument for removing cocoons, particularly for your wood blocks. Sometimes they get pretty stuck in there and they are a little delicate. So you can use the end of a screwdriver, a spoon, a specialty cocoon comb, all sorts of things for helping you to get those cocoons loose from your nesting material. And then lastly, you'll need a container for bathing your cocoons in a bleach solution, if you opt to do the bleach solution. This year, I decided to try to use Crown Bee's Clean Bee solution, which uses hypochlorous acid. So this is a little bit gentler than the bleach solution, won't dry out my hands as much, and it's pretty easy to use. As far as mason bee habitats, you may have something different than me. Most commonly, you'll be using either the wood block here or the paper tubes. And as you can see, the paper tubes are the little white things here. We also have cardboard protectors, and the cardboard protectors are really going to help negate your predation from mono wasps, which is one of the nastiest pests of mason bees. So first things first, you have to remove the cocoons from your nesting material in order to really do anything by them. Remove your rubber bands from your blocks, separate the wood partitions. Be gentle here, but a little bit of tug isn't going to hurt anything. Sometimes the partitions will be stuck together. Use your fingers or a tool to scoop the cocoons out of the grooves. Like I mentioned before, screwdriver, your mason bee scraper, a spoon handle, just something simple that you can easily move the cocoons away. And then you drop your cocoons onto your sheet pan as you go. If you're using paper tubes, depending on which brand you get, it could be easier or a little bit more difficult. Crown Bee has some really nice, easy tear tubes. So if you're looking for something easier, try Crown Bee's tubes. They're really, really nice. You remove your cardboard protective outer tubes, and these you can use again next year. They're just for protecting your cocoons from mono wasps. So keep those on hand, definitely use them again next year. If the tubes don't peel easily, maybe you're not using the Crown Bee tubes, maybe you are, and for some reason they're just giving you some trouble. It's okay to soak them in cool water, not warm, for about 10 minutes, and this will loosen the paper and just kind of fall away. And you're going to see lots of mason bee frass. That's totally okay. The larval frass or poop is going to be all on the outside of the cocoon. The bees are smart enough not to put them inside the cocoon, so don't worry about that. And I've got a picture here of me harvesting my own cocoons from my wood block. As you can see, I'm using my mason bee scraper here. It's spaced perfectly so that I can do 4 rows all at the same time. You've got a little pollen granule in here. You can see your little clay walls where the mother has partitioned each cocoon into its own little area. And you see plenty of little black frass as well. So what I've done here is I've separated the cocoons from all of the debris, and then I am able to clean them from there. As you're putting your cocoons into your colander, make sure to inspect them, make sure that they're good, they're quality, and they're actually mason bees. Sometimes you'll find more than mason bees in your block. If you see a large yellow larva, that's usually going to be a summer bee, a leaf cutter. So you can put those back out and let them develop over winter. You'll see some wasp larvae, some reeds sticking out of your cocoons, perhaps. This is okay too. The thread-waisted wasp is pretty commonly in there as well as your summer bees. And the thread-waisted wasp is actually a minor pollinator as well. It's not a pest. As far as pests go, though, you'll pretty commonly see pollen mites. They are so tiny that you really need a hand lens to actually see them, but they're a slightly lighter color than your pollen. They're going to be pretty light yellow. Houdini flies, mainly you're going to be seeing the little white larva at this point, and carpet beetles. I haven't seen any of these in my mason bees, luckily, but something to watch out for as well. Make sure you get rid of all of your mites, your Houdini flies, and your carpet beetles. And I mentioned before, not every mason bee is going to make it, so make sure to weed out any empty or infested cocoons and discard them. You can tell that a mason bee has been predated upon by a mono wasp if you see a tiny little hole in the cocoon. Should be no bigger than about the tip of a paper clip here. You can also hold them up to a bright light, put them on top of a flashlight or something, and you can kind of see the bee inside and tell whether or not it's healthy. Fungal chalk brood kind of looks like a moldy sort of substance. You want to make sure to clean this off. Caved in cocoons or dried larvae, obviously not going to make it, so weed those out and place all of the healthy cocoons into your colander for bathing. Example here of things that you may find in your mason bee block. I opted to take my mason bee block, the one on the left here, in the garage in a mesh bag. So I had exclusively mason bees in here, and I didn't have to worry about summer bees and wasps and things in there. This photo on the right, however, I left out just to see what would pop in there. I have leafcutter bees, thread-waisted wasps, and this tube in the middle is kind of interesting. It seems to be a type of wasp, but I don't know exactly what it is. Usually you can tell the difference between a nesting bee and a nesting wasp based on the texture of the cappings here. Your leafcutter bees, they'll stick some leaves in there. It's going to be kind of a rough opening, whereas your wasp uses vibrations to settle in the material, and it'll be pretty smooth surface. All right, so we have our cocoons ready to wash. First off, rinse them off. You want to get rid of all the frass and the loose debris on the outside of the cocoons. Make sure you're using cool water. If you use warm water, that might confuse them, and you don't want anybody hatching here. Garden hose works great. It's okay to use a little bit of force to loosen all the debris. Not going to hurt the mason bees, and they do have waterproof cocoons, so no worries there. Sanitizing is going to get rid of any of your bacterial or your fungal diseases, chalk brood mainly. Your clean bee solution will only take 3 or 4 sprays per side. Nice and easy, got plenty of solution in there. Conversely, you can mix a solution of bleach water and put that in a little container for soaking. You want a very mild bleach solution. It's definitely possible to go too heavy here. So about a gallon of water and a tablespoon of bleach is all you really want to use. Now, it's really important that you rinse and then you dry your mason bee cocoons. You want humidity, but you don't want too much humidity. So once you're all cleaned, rinse the cocoons and gently pat or roll the cocoons in your paper towels to dry. You see here, I've actually separated the mason bee cocoons into male and female respectively. On top here, I have the slightly larger female mason bees, and on the bottom, I have the males. And you'll notice that there are more males than females. This is pretty typical. When you're loosening your mason bee cocoons, you can kind of tell as well. So mason bees will lay females first because they know they're going to hatch later. And then further down towards the entrance of the tubes, that's where she'll lay her male babies. So pat those dry after you have cleaned them with clean bee or bleach. And then storage of the cocoons is actually very simple. Just a couple rules you need to keep in mind. They need to be nice and cool, so refrigerator temperatures are great. 36 to 39 degrees is optimal. The humidity is the part that you really need to pay attention to here. They want 60% or higher humidity. You don't want them drying out. Your modern frost-free refrigerators typically aren't that humid, so it's a good idea to use a container with air holes so they don't asphyxiate, and use a little bit of water in the bottom of the container to keep that humidity going. We have specialty made humidity containers that work really well. They've got carbon filters in there as well, so that'll help keep things clean in there. Homemade containers work just fine. Sandwich container with a couple holes in it, some carbon filter from the fish store works just fine as well. Don't let the cocoons get wet is the main thing. You want them to be humid, but not wet. If they get wet, they're going to wind up molding, and that's not what you're looking for. Mold isn't the end of the deal, though. If you are checking on your mason bee cocoons, you've got a little bit of mold on there. Not the end of the world. Simply take your mason bee cocoons out, re-clean them, like I just explained, and set them back in the refrigerator. Usually about once a week is a good idea to check on them. If you have humidity control, put that inside your mason bee container, and it's super easy. Just take a quick look, everything's set. You may need to add more water if the humidity gets too low. And don't forget to clean your nesting material as well. Particularly if you did see signs of pollen mites, of chalk brood, something like this. Use your clean bee solution, clean it out, make sure it's nice and sanitary. You don't want to sanitize mason bee tubes that look perfectly healthy, however. Reason being, when mason bees use the nesting material, they leave behind pheromones, and those pheromones are going to encourage future generations to nest in the same place. So make sure it's clean, but not too clean. A stiff brush is really nice when it comes to cleaning out the solids, your pollen, your frass, particularly your clay plugs. An old toothbrush works great. And once you're finished, mason bee blocks attract all sorts of things. So it's a good idea to store your mason bee block in a paper bag, a mesh bag, something like that, and keep it in the garage to keep pests out during winter until you're ready to use it again. Spiders, for some reason or other, love mason bee blocks, but if you're like me, you're kind of arachnophobic and you'd like to avoid that. See here, I've got my humidibee with all of my nice clean mason bees inside. I've got about a tablespoon of water below the carbon filter here, and it's ready to go in the fridge. And then my mason bee block here, I'm about ready to clean it out with a stiff brush. And then I've got these two kind of dirty looking tubes that I did see some pollen mite residue in there. And I'm going to clean it out with a couple sprays of my clean bee solution here. All right. So now we've harvested our cocoons, we have cleaned them, we've put them in the refrigerator, and we've made sure the humidity is optimal. We've also put our mason bee block in storage and made sure it's clean. So now that we've done all of this, we're going to repeat the cycle in spring. So late February to March, that's when you're really going to start watching that weather. You want 3 good days, 55 degrees, no rain, low winds is optimal. And you want to make sure there's plenty of flowers nearby. And there's lots of clay. Around February, March, it's pretty easy to keep the clay wet. So a quick look is all you really need there. If you've got a bumper crop of cocoons, it's a good idea to release several batches throughout early spring for best pollination and best nesting success. You may release one and have it not be as successful because the weather takes a nasty turn, release again, you're going to have more bees coming out, and you're going to wind up with a lot more cocoons to harvest in the fall this way. Typically, each successful female lays somewhere between 1 and 2 tubes of eggs, and those tubes usually hold around 12 eggs. So if you have a really successful year, you're going to wind up with way too many cocoons. It's always fun to share with neighbors, share this video with people as well, kind of get them into it. Definitely a lot of fun. All right, I think that's just about all I've got for you today. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to email me, give me a call, or stop in at the store. I'm going to open it up for questions here in a second. And thank you very much. Have a great morning.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you say they need 3 days of above 55 temperature and no rain. You mean like 3 days from when you let them out, or when you put out the cocoons, not like 3 dry days before you let them out, right?
When you put them out, you should have 3 good days ahead of you. You're giving them a chance to hatch and to immediately go out and forage for food. If they don't get food in the first couple of days of hatching, it's likely they'll starve.